Okay, everybody, I think we will go ahead and get started. My name is James Robson. I'm the Victor and William Fung Director of the Harvard Asia Center and also a professor in the East Asian Languages and Civilizations Department here at Harvard University. I just wanted to welcome you all to this morning's Asia Beyond the Headlines seminar series as part of the Asia Center. And I would just say a few things to start here. We're managing some connectivity issues since this is a very broad panel that's bringing people together that are based in the U.S., but also in up in Manipur and different parts of India as well, and right on the border. So it is also Holi Festival, which is creating a little bit of festivities there, but also some chaos for making sure we can get everybody online in time. But that's fine. We'll work around it the best way possible. So we're extremely pleased at the Asia Center to be able to host this morning's or evening, if you're in South Asia, panel discussion entitled "The Origins of Manipur's Armed Conflict: Ways Forward for Peace Talks, Reconciliation, and Coexistence of Ethnic Communities." So this event, the recent events taking place in Manipur, is part of our ongoing, at the Asia Center, our ongoing attempt to provide updated and accurate information about the conflict in the region, and follows on earlier programs that we've done since our initial online event with one of our participants, Binalakshmi Nepram, who joined us for an event in 2020 and then also again in 2022. In the fall of 2020, after meeting Bina, we did an initial discussion of Manipur's history and culture that was entitled "Conflicts, Activism, and Women Leadership in Manipur and Northeast India," which allowed all of us, I think, to learn much about Manipur from Bina's presentation. And especially about its long history, the natural beauty of the region, the wonderful people of the region, but also some of the political changes and challenges, including ongoing violence that have been inflicted on the region. But also a focus on the role of women and the leadership roles they've played in Manipur. At that time, the Asia Center made a commitment to keeping up our reporting and fostering programs on Manipur so that it remains in people's awareness. I think, as we all know, it often gets lost with all of the focus that's been going on over the years with the conflict in Myanmar, in Ukraine, in Syria, and now most recently with the Israel-Palestine war. So unfortunately, after a period of decreasing violence, then again in December of 2021, Manipur reappeared as a place of concern in the international media after the Indian Army Special Forces mistook a truckload of ethnic coal miners for militants and attacked the truck, killing 8 miners. And then in the protests and demonstrations that followed, more civilians were killed. So that incident really struck home as revealing the fragility of the peace agreement that was made some 25 years ago. More recently, on May 25th of 2023, nearly a year ago, as you all know, a violent ethnic conflict erupted in Manipur, and that conflict resulted in the displacement of over 70,000 people, the loss of something on the order of 200 lives, and the destruction of at least 10,000 homes. So this panel discussion aims to provide further insights into the recent and quite complicated events in Manipur and uncover the root causes of the armed conflict that has persisted in this region for over 70 years. And again, I think it's important because although there was, to my knowledge, at least one article in the New York Times back in 2023, there has not been much widespread coverage in the Western media on what's been taking place there. So today's discussion will hopefully shed some light on that, also with voices from the region, which is what this whole series at the Asia Center is all about. So the discussion will also highlight, again, the exceptional efforts of Indigenous women in promoting peace in this troubled area. And so today we're extremely honored to be joined by 3 panelists. And I see that Pradip Phanjaobam has just signed on. Thank you for joining us, Pradip. And so I'll introduce him first. Actually, I'll introduce all 3 panelists first, and then I will turn the mic over to them for their comments. So Pradip Phanjaobam. He is one of Manipur's most highly regarded and, dare I say, prolific journalists, and serves as the editor of the Imphal Review of Arts and Politics in Manipur. He began his career as a journalist in 1986 as a sub-editor of the Economic Times in New Delhi, and he has written extensively on affairs of the Northeast for many important publications, both in the mainstream media as well as in academic journals. So he provides a particularly important voice for this discussion. He's been a fellow at the Indian Institute of Advanced Studies in Shimla and from 2012 to 2014, and is the author of two books, The Northeast Question, Conflicts and Frontiers, that was published by Routledge in 2016, and also a beautiful book entitled Shadow and Light, A Kaleidoscope of Manipur, also published in 2016, which really provides a captivating introduction and depiction of the history, art, culture, and traditions of the multi-ethnic people of Manipur. So welcome, Pradip. Also joining the panel today is Jarjum, who is a social activist turned politician who has worked for the development of women in Arunachal Pradesh for over 3 decades. She's the former chairperson of the Arunachal Pradesh State Commission for Women, where she was from 2005 to 2008. And prior to that, she had joined the Arunachal Pradesh Women's Welfare Society back in 1985 and became an active volunteer, and later rose to be its president from 2000 to 2003. The Arunachal Pradesh Women's Welfare Society took up many issues that were concerned with women's participation in institutions of local government, customary laws, and the need for a state women's commission that also provided activism related to anti-liquor laws, and has also she spent many years advocating for more youth participation in politics. She was one of the participants in the groundbreaking Fourth World Conference on Women held in Beijing in 1995, which I remember well. I was there that year. And she has dedicated her life to working for the development of women in Arunachal Pradesh, taking up issues of child marriage and challenging all forms of patriarchy. So welcome, Jarjum, to this morning's or evening's panel for you, evening. And finally, an old friend of the Asia Center and a personal friend, Binalakshmi Nepram, is an Indigenous scholar and woman human rights defender whose work focuses on deepening democracy and championing women-led peace, security, and disarmament in Manipur. She is the founding director of the Manipur Women Gun Survivors Network and Northeast India Women's Initiative for Peace, and is a senior advisor on Indigenous issues for the Religion and Inclusive Societies team at the United States Institute of Peace. She's been a fellow at the Carr Center for Human Rights and Policy at Harvard University, and we are very pleased to have her as a fellow of the Harvard University Asia Center, where we've benefited so much from her affiliation and contributions. She's also held visiting positions at Columbia University and Connecticut College, where she designed and taught a course based on her 15 years of activism that was entitled Women, War, and Peace. She's authored or edited 5 books. I won't go through all of them here, but her work has garnered international recognition, including the Dalai Lama Foundation's Winscup Scholar of Peace Fellowship and the Sean McBride Peace Prize in 2010. In October of 2018, along with the 2015 Nobel Literature Laureate from Belarus, she received the Anna Politkovskaya Award in 2018, and this is among other awards and recognitions that she's had. So today's panel will be structured in the following way. The panelists will first give about 15 to 20 minutes of comments, and then we'll shift to a more free-flowing discussion and provide opportunities for questions from those who have signed online. And I welcome all of you online. If you would like to ask questions, please use the Q&A function by typing your questions into the box there, and I will curate the questions during the discussion at that time. So we'll lead off. I think we decided that, Bina, you will give a kind of a general context first, and then we will move to Jarjum, and then finally Pradip will give his comments. Does that sound like the right order for you?
Actually, I would like Tamu Pradip to start first because he's now on board.
Okay, so good. Okay, I wasn't sure if we wanted to give him time to get acclimated, but I guess Pradip is used to these things and he's ready just to jump right in. So thank you so much, Pradip, and we look forward to hearing your presentation. And I'll turn the mic over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I will be just giving a sketch of what happened and the nature of prolonged conflict. I mean, I would make a distinction between a conflict and a prolonged conflict. The prolonged conflict actually grows into everybody, every, including the press, becomes part of that thing. So it's really difficult to say where exactly is the truth. So I wouldn't really go into who started it and who did it, but I just want to highlight the difficulty of actually portraying a prolonged conflict and to actually identify the victim or the perpetrator. That is what I want to start with. And also, I'm starting with this because I think it is extremely difficult for us in Manipur, or for people watching from outside to actually take a total grip of the situation here and also portray it truthfully. And after some time, you even get confused about what actually is the truth behind this. And there's so much of things happening, and these atrocities that happen carry you away from what is the dynamic behind this conflict itself. So let me begin. I'm actually lost for a start, and I don't know where to start because so much has happened. But let me just say that this is very unfortunate, tragic, and this could have been avoided. I mean, I think that's also important. This could have been avoided had the government handled the situation or the developments more sensitively, and that was not the case. It was quite the government was quite blatant about this. I mean, certain issues, there are big issues which had to be tackled, and these could have been tackled more sensitively. This is basically what I'm saying. For instance, the idea of drugs, the poppy, and these things had to be tackled, but it could have been tackled more sensitively. Or the thing about encroachment into forest areas. And of course, there's a larger issue of what, especially in India, of what constitutes a forest. In fact, the current act which defines the forest was written in 1927. So that is still in. But they are wanting to trying to rewrite the Forest Act to define what a forest is. And that is another issue, larger issue, I would say, which got involved into this, dragged into this. And people see forests differently, the authorities as well as and especially in the Northeast, it was always a frontier, and as a frontier, the policies were not always very clear. You tackle policy, you don't actually, for instance, in the case of the Northeast, after 1826, when the British came in here, they took over the Assam, and Assam was practically the entire Northeast. And then as any administrator, you had to administer the land, and that was where the trouble began. You had the revenue plains, which made sense to the new administration, and the wild hills, as I call it. They didn't know how to tackle that, and also initially there was no revenue there. In fact, there was some inquiries, surveys done, because they, especially after 1834. When tea was started growing and was successful in Assam, the tea growers actually wanted more land in the foothills and all that. So the government was actually asked to extend the administration even to the hills, and the government actually did some surveys. And I don't remember the exact officer who did it. And this was first done in the Naga Hills, and they did a survey and came back with a report that to extend the administration to open new police stations, you will be needing about 20,000 rupees. I don't have the exact figure, and I'm just recalling offhand. So about 20,000, and the revenue you get from taxes will be 1,500, something like that. So there was a huge difference. So what the government did was, forget it. We will administer only the plains, and the hills will be left as unadministered area. We will claim the land, but we will not administer it, and they will be under the broad gaze of the governor. It will not be the region will not be participating in the legislative process as well. And under the governor of India, 1919, this area came area which are not governed came to be known as the excluded area. Excluded area initially the unadministered area, but it changed in 1935. The government of India in 1935 this nomenclature changed, and part of this the greater section of the hills was still called the excluded area. But some parts were brought into the administration, partially brought in, and they were called the partially excluded area, which included the Khasi and Jantia hills, as well as Karbi Anglong and things like that, regions which are not too far away from the administration and which had got a little familiar with the administration. So that kind of administration happened, and the forest that we in the excluded area came to be known as unclassed forest. In 1927, as I said before, 1927 the forest laws were written, and the forest law had they classified the forest into reserve forest, and later on also something called the protected forest. Well, I'll come to that later, or maybe in the next round. And but the forests outside of the administered area were just left as unclassed forests, which were meant to be, community forest. Now is being interpreted that way. But the government of India is now planning to redefine these forests as well. And that is also causing a bit of problem. But coming back to Manipur, the encroachment in the forest, many of the tribes are saying that this should not be, because forest is where we live. And you can't just classify it as reserve or protected forest. So we can spread anywhere we want. We can set up a village. So that kind of clash was also there in this particular thing. And we must say that in Manipur, especially in the hills, we have the Nagas and the Kukis. Nagas are more settled, and Kukis are not, maybe because of the economy, and also they were maybe the terrain as well, that there's no settled agriculture there. So you keep spread this, the village keeps spreading. And also the ownership of the village is quite different between the Nagas and the Kukis. The Kukis, the village chiefs owns the village as well as the land, and the rest of the villagers are virtually landless. They are, some even called it, they have a serf kind of a relationship with the chief. So what happens is anybody prominent in the village will just go away from the village and set up his own village. And to do that, he or she will probably, it's always he, so he will have to bring in, try to woo some more villages, some more of the families. And that is not always successful. So you'll try to bring in people from everywhere and anywhere available, that kind of thing. So the spread into the reserve forest as well as the protected forest was because it is, and it was mostly the Kukis. So when the thing about eviction from forests came about, the Kukis were the Kuki-Zo tribes, I would say, were the ones who were mostly hurt, and that is another thing. So what I'm again emphasizing is that the government could have handled this a little more sensitively. Since you have allowed that encroachment, maybe there should be some kind of resettlement, that kind of thing, that kind of arrangement should have been done. But although the eviction process had not begun in a big way, it had begun first in the foothills, and most of those evicted were especially from urban areas. We have again in the valley hillocks which are declared as reserve forests, many hillocks which are declared as reserve forests. There were encroachment happening there. So initially, the eviction were basically from other communities, Métis and Nagas, who are settled in the valley, and some Kukis as well. But the notices given for eviction were basically in the larger reserve forests, and they came mostly to the Kukis. So that kind of hurt was there, and this was not tackled well. And again, the poppy thing was also very much there. It was growing. It's a huge economy, and so many people are estimating different amounts. So I don't, but it's huge. Let me just say it's huge. And the government had started the campaign against drugs. And of course, when you have this poppy thing, it's also about the deforestation, because these are basically grown in the forest, previously forested area and all that. So these larger issues were there, and it had to be tackled. It was a human problem, because those people growing poppy are actually the poorer lot, and the poorer lot again, the smaller villages which didn't have much of agriculture and other sources of income. So it was again basically falling on with the needle of suspicion, as they say, was basically on mostly on the cookies. So that again they felt targeted, and these things not tackled well. And I think that's where the initial spark came about. There was the Métis also, and also what we have to understand is that in a conflict there are two parties. The Métis also they are settled in the valley, and there's also a sense of siege among them that you can't go out anywhere. You're the only non-tribal amongst the tribals, and as a non-tribal you can't go out of that revenue area. And unlike in Assam where the revenue area is big, in Manipur the revenue area is very small. It's only about 10% of the whole state, so they are confined there, and in that area everybody can settle. So that mindset of being under a siege, it was very much there. So it was like a time bomb that it was really getting just ready to explode. And the spark came about from their demand to be included in the Silver Tribe list, to become tribal, so that you can be as everybody else is. You can settle anywhere in the state, and also get the benefits of being tribes that the Indian Constitution provides. And this was protested by the Nagas as well as Cookies. But because of the sensitiveness of the things that I portrayed just now about the Cookies feeling targeted, and the Métis feeling they are also being targeted in a different way, that they're kept under siege. These two, the explosive energy within them was what was triggered off, which is why the Nagas did not respond as much as violently as the Cookies did, or the Métis also did not see the Nagas so much as an adversary as the Cookies did, because these sensitivities which were there already. So this is how I would see it. And now what's happening is it's been here, the conflict has been around for almost a year now, and in a year so much has happened. And people, even those people who are neutral, who wanted peace, are by compulsion withdrawing into the background, and the most vocal hawkish kind of voices are coming up. And when you put the hawks and doves together, I keep saying this, that you hear only the hawks, and not only that, you also have the doves begin to speak the hawk language, because the hawk language in a conflict situation, in a prolonged conflict situation, has more of that sheen of valor and that seductive quality. So even the people who would have spoken much more softly are beginning to speak the militant language, not because they believe in it, but because they're just carried by that wind of militancy. And I think this is where the problem is, and which is why it's also becoming very difficult to control it. And I hope that sense will return. It will have to be broken at some point, this rivalry. And I think it will have to be the track two kind of approach, in a way you're not thinking in terms of a whole scale kind of solution to the problem, but you start penetrating the small circles of friends, former colleagues, and then we get them to talk. For instance, amongst the journalists, people are still in communication with each other, get them to meet. And from those small circles, let the goodwill spread. And I'm sure it will. Just as the hatred spreads, small acts of goodwill can also spread equally. So I think what is now necessary is for interventions like this, in smaller ways, getting people who know each other to meet, and then discover that everything is not so bad, that things can be salvaged, and they will spread the message in their own circle. It'll take time, but I think there is no other way that you do it in a big way. There's going to be opposition. As I said, the hawks are very much around, and the hawks are the ones who are mostly heard, and they are the ones who can intimidate and things like that. So I think to break this cycle of violence is not going to be so easy, but it can be. I would end on that positive note. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pradip. It's always nice in the face of chaos and problems to have a positive outlook of hope, at least, rather than just facing the kind of pessimistic viewpoint that where things at times seem totally intractable. So I will come back to some of the points you raised when we open up the discussion, I think, which will be important because there's still parts of it, I think, for us that might be useful for us to understand in terms of that complicated history and also potential solutions to get out of this cycle that we're in right now. So right now, let's shift over to Ani Jarjum, who is making extraordinary efforts. She's actually stopped on the road while she's driving between places to join us this evening there. And so I know that she may have to depart a little bit later in this panel discussion later. So we'll get her in now, and then we'll hopefully keep her as long as we possibly can. But I'll turn the microphone over to you, Jarjum. Thank you.
Thank you very much, James. There are, I think we have 21 participants who are not on the screen, on the grid. Greetings to all of you from Arunachal Pradesh. That's my state in the northeastern tip of India. I have Myanmar on the east, then on the north I have Tibet, now occupied by China, and on the west I have the Royal Kingdom of Bhutan, and of course Assam that Pradip mentioned. Supposedly Arunachal those days was known as Nepha, which was part of the unadministered part of Assam under the British. Now James has introduced me about my activism and all. Apart from my rights activism, I also happen to be a Rotarian, and also as part of my political responsibility, I had been traveling to Manipur many often, like since 2000, especially in different capacities. And so when this violence, almost a year long now, 3rd May was the first time, we heard that something bad has happened in Manipur. And so when we heard this, we thought, okay, it happens once in a while, but it will end. Then from days it went to weeks and to months, and on the end of the 2nd month, actually we have a network, loose network of concerned friends, and from academics, from rights groups, generally personal friends, acquaintances. So we also have these women's WhatsApp groups, especially regional northeast based women's group. And also a few friends we started talking, and someone said there's this discussion, kind of very close group discussion, if it would be possible. And we also say, why not? We need to at least reach out. As Pradip said, we may not be able to do anything immediately, but we need to listen to them, just be there for them to know that, there are friends who are willing to listen, who are trying to reach out, that kind of humanitarian outreach also needs to be there. So initially we proposed a goodwill kind of a thing, but that sounded too big a thing for 4 women to do. So we said, okay, whatever little we can do, let's go and be there and listen to our people from both the communities. So on actually the 3rd month, 3rd May it started, and on the 3rd August we reached Imphal. We're 4 women, Dr. Roshmi Goswami, who's also a rights activist, and Dr. Sayyada Hamid, she's a very concerned lady who was also in the Planning Commission of India. And then we had Anjala Rangat. She is also a very active, politically conscious and concerned activist from Meghalaya. And of course, I was also part of that. So very interestingly, Sayyada ji happens to be a Muslim lady, born into a Muslim family. Then Roshmi Goswami is from Hindu background. Then Anjala, she happens to be a Christian, and I'm a non-practicing, I don't say agnostic or atheist, but I don't belong to any organized religion. I was not born into one, and I choose not to be part of any. So we generally said, okay, we seem to be a kind of very organic, cohesive group. So let's go. So on the 3rd, we contacted and met some of our Meitei friends in Imphal, and we listened to them. All were very concerned, but no one seemed to know how exactly things could be tackled, because it was kind of something out of the blue, kind of something beyond their control. Things seemed to be, of course, it was tragic, it was ominous, and it also kind of they couldn't exactly say how to go about it, but they also shared their pains and their shock, the tragedies they have witnessed, and their also helplessness. And on the 4th, we wanted to go to Churachandpur, where actually I think most of the tragedies happened. Unfortunately, they said we couldn't go there because there was some burial was being proposed, but basically people were not being allowed to go to Churachandpur from Imphal side. So we went to Technopole district, which is on the international, proposed ASEAN highway to Myanmar through More. So they are basically inhabited mostly by the Kuki Zoo group, and there was this huge protest by women. And we also realized both in the Imphal Valley, it was the Meitei women who were on the road picketing and checking, doing the frisking thing. And even in Technopole, we also saw that it was the women, the Kuki women, who were actually camping on the roadside. They had put up shade and cooking for the volunteers who were on the picket. And everywhere, we, at least for me as a women's rights person, on the 2nd day of my arrival at Imphal and in Manipur, I started feeling the pressure of the, helplessness. We couldn't do anything, and you are listening to people, you are watching how they were trying to kind of, run home and also manage the, people on the road, trying to protect their communities and all those. And 1 day, 2 days, okay, 3 months, they had been doing this. And every day there was more news about violence in some or the other corner. So Technopole was also, we visited one relief camp where pregnant ladies were there, small babies who had been recently delivered, and sick people, elderly, and then some school children who were who had no books, who were sitting in the relief camp just like that. It was a very sad sight. And food, of course, initially there was no government supply immediately, especially reaching in the hills. But again, there were some counter, public operations where food was also being, transportation was being stopped into the valley. So, and then one evening, we also experienced how the state machinery was also at play. Like we heard gunshots, we heard explosion of something. Of course, since I'm new to all these things, it was kind of, we're trying to figure out, we're sitting with some friends for dinner, and they said, no, they are using tear gases. So the whole area would be full of the fumes. So they had to shut down all the shutters and curtains, everything. The is much as possible they're trying to make sure that air from the polluted air from outside was not coming, because then some people said, like, we're feeling some sharp this thing in the eyes. And so that night we're actually not allowed to go back to our hotel, because the road was, like, affected. And then on the 5th we went to Bishnupur. It was an attempt to go to Churachandpur. So Bishnupur is on the way, but again there were these ladies, the Meitei ladies who were on the pickets. They said they even kind of looked into our vehicle, and actually they thought I was a Zomi lady. So the lady who came to look into our vehicle, she spoke to our escort, who is a Meitei girl, said she's she looks like a Zomi. She's from Arunachal Pradesh. She's visiting here. So, but they still seem to suspect. So that was the kind of suspicion, and how the women were involved into this, because and later we learned that at Kwakta, it's a small kind of township between Imphal and Churachandpur, and it is mostly dominated by the Pangal. This thing, Pangals are the Muslim Manipuris. So they were actually supposed to be neutral population, more like the kind of buffer for both the Kuki-dominated Churachandpur and Meitei-dominated, Imphal. So Kwakta was supposed to be a buffer zone, but that night, three Pangal people were killed by the sharpshooters, Kuki sharpshooters, and the bodies were not being taken out. So, but there was a group of women who were sitting with the widows, a young widow, one of them. So we also said, okay, if we cannot go to Churachandpur, let's kind of, at least spend some time with the grieving families. And then this lady was kind of lamenting that if the chief minister had taken the initiative to contain the violence in the first few days, my husband would still have been alive today. And then we, in Kwakta Bazaar, there was this Meitei, I think he's a popular musician, I forget his name, but he came to us and interacted with us, and he said, Narendra Modi is answerable for this. Like, he must be held answerable for this, because if the state wants, they can stop this violence, but they are not stopping this. And today our innocent people are, like, dying. And of course, the many cases of violence, the immolation of a mother and child and escort, and the mutilation, the beheading, the murder of two young students, abduction of young ladies and their, so all those things were actually also starting to affect us. And the more it kind of sunk into us, especially in my case, in 4 days I almost went into depression. I started binging, actually, and I said, this is not me. And I was not able to deal with it. And the more I realized that my sympathies kind of, I wish I could reach out and help all those women who had to leave behind their little kids at home to do the picketing on the roadside. And but we couldn't. And then all those bodies lying in the morgues and the hospitals, unclaimed, or who had not been sent home for decent burials, or then the missing people. So many things were happening simultaneously. And we, in one place in Kangpokpi, we went to visit one of the survivors of sexual violence, and a young kid, like, you know, in the relief camp, actually, people were staring at her, and she didn't know how to deal with it. So some young, you know, very concerned workers in the relief camp, they had shifted this uh, survivor and her mother and father to a small shanty outside the village. So people were trying to help, but around that time, we also realized that children were not having access to food, and then even things like small sanitary napkins for the women, menstruating women, like, you know, relief materials were in short supply, and things were not being allowed to come in, you know, from Dimapur side also. So they were trying to send it through Aizawl, very long distance into Churachandpur. And so, and recently, of course, we heard that I think 3 or 4 little kids from a relief camp actually got drowned in a river. I think Pradip would know better about the details. But that's one, security, and, you know, how children have to kind of, you know, survive without security, and their education, of course, is the last priority as of today. And now the general elections are around the corner, and people who have been displaced and who are in relief camps outside Manipur, they are not likely to get the privilege to exercise their adult franchise. And that's another. And like, you know, even political parties today, you know, is an flip side of this whole thing. Even the ruling party, I think, is not able to find a candidate for certain, you know, constituencies, and other parties where candidates have been put up, they are again being shot at, you know. I personally don't know, because I haven't been able to follow up. So these, you know, one thing from another, things are spiraling out of control. And I believe the ruling Bharatiya Janata Party at the national level, they have asked the Chief Minister of Manipur to step down, and he's not willing to do that. This is kind of, you know, absolutely unimaginable in a democratic setup like India. And especially my generation, or Pradeep's generation, we had seen better days. And we know this, the government of India, if they really want, they can actually clamp down on this whole, you know, situation, and say, okay, enough is enough, which they are not doing. As Pradeep said, there are many things which the state had to take, you know, control of, but that also hasn't been done, and they are just allowing this violence to go on. And I personally feel like, you know, today is the I think 19th or 20th day where Sonam Wangchuk is you know, on hunger strike in Ladakh, because democracy has been taken away from the Ladakhis, and they are wanting protection of their environment, of their ecology, of their land, and whatever they have. The government of India is not, you know, even stepping in or listening to them. Similarly, I have a feeling that, you know, they might be letting Manipur kind of, you know, destroy itself, implode, you know. And for whatever, I also feel the land and the forest, the resources that we have in the Northeast, may be the target of the corporates in India, which again, with the brute majority that they are looking at or planning for in the general election of 2024, I don't see Manipur, you know, kind of sitting back and say, okay, let's reflect and, you know, try and build peace again, unless, you know, some kind of, now, of course, the young students are coming out on the streets and say, okay, we want peace. they need support. There are mothers and senior citizens and concerned civil society organizations also saying, okay, we want peace, enough is enough, enough of violence. But we need more universities, more peace organizations, more international facilitators, and peace brokers, peace warriors to join hands and show us the way, and encourage the few people who are stepping up and say, okay, can we talk about peace? So this is way when Bina and her colleagues said, Ani, we want you to be on the panel, and this is happening. I said, okay, from Arunachal, this is the least I can do, because we need peace back in Manipur, because I personally feel also that if we cannot handle the situation in Manipur, it will just kind of cascade onto Assam, to Nagaland, to Arunachal, many things, and this whole region, which is also the biodiversity hotspot, in the Eastern Himalayas, in Asia. It's a world heritage, and our environment would be up for grabs for the hungry, thirsty, or the people in the corporate sector who just want profits at our costs, at the cost of our beautiful forests and nature. So when it was Harvard University, I said, okay, let me just share a few thoughts. Of course, it's for you to follow up. James, I look forward. Thank you very much, friends, people who are not visible on the screen. Thanks for listening. And Bina, thank you for bringing me in and introducing me to James and Harvard University. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jarjum. And thank you for providing a really, I think, intimate, up-close perspective from your experience of traveling to the region. And I think actually, in spite of the sort of further complications that you raised in terms of the difficulties of trying to resolve these issues, it seemed to me one of the common themes that between your comments and also Pradip's comments were the necessity of conversation, bringing people together, listening to people, trying to restore that kind of mutual trust and through conversation. And so hopefully today's effort will, be a very tiny little effort in that. But I think conversation, that's our commitment as well, is just talking about difficult issues and not trying to avoid them, because in the silence, that's where misunderstandings, mistrust, other things tend to develop. So thank you very much. Those are really, I think, important and observations from your own experience on the ground there. So now we'll turn it over to Bina to give her comments, and we'll probably provide a bit wider perspective on things, and then we'll open it up to discussion after that. So Bina, I turn the microphone to you.
Yes, thank you so much, James, and Damo Pradip, Anya Jarjum, Tenzin, and James. This is a really important moment for us, and thank you to the Asia Center at Harvard University for doing this very timely session. And as Damo Pradip has also mentioned, that in the past 1 year, through the cacophony of this, as you have heard from both Damo Pradip and Anya Jarjum, in the last 1 year, something unprecedented happened in the history of Manipur, something which has not happened in the magnitude that we have seen, the violence. And for some of us who are scholars and who are also humanitarian and doing work for ensuring peace and justice for the last 2 decades in my home region, we have been watching acutely what is happening. And my presentation fits beautifully and tragically into what Damo Pradip and Anya Jarjum also said, but we also have been looking at solutions, because this is what is the need of the hour. And we have been working since the day one of the violence eruption on the 3rd of May. We have been working time and again through nights, sleepless nights. Some of us may not speak the jargon of the hero, as Damo Pradip has said, but we have been working very hard every single day to find solutions to this. So my presentation will focus on why there is this conflict happening, the origins of this conflict, because it is so important to set the context. It will also drive home what are the different factors driving this conflict, because it is not just an ethnic conflict. It is beyond, as Ani Jarjum had also started pointing out. So I have been conducting research, writing, and analysis on this region for the last 20 years of my life. And it's going to be for the next remaining part of our life. This is not for us a project, but working for peace in Manipur and Northeast is for us a commitment of a lifetime. So we've been So some of the sharing that I'm going to do, we'll look into, because good research allows us to make good policies. If our research is not right, we cannot even start to formulate peace-building initiatives or ensuring that our people and our region are able to get into the path of development like the rest of the world is. The reason as to why Manipur continues to be in a state of conflict for the last 7 decades. What was Manipur? Why is Manipur? And the last 10 years, 10 months to 1 year, in which there was it felt as if Manipur was as an existentialist threat to even the function. So we went through that trauma. So let me pull up my slides with permission of everyone and the chair. So this is a beautiful picture of Manipur by Nirjan Sharma, and we're looking at pathways towards peace, healing, and reconciliation. Very important to say the context. As Ani Jarjum has also said, that currently it is not just, as James has also mentioned, if you look at current conflicts in the world, 80% of the world's conflicts are happening in biodiversity hotspots where indigenous people live. So if we are worried just only in Manipur, you're mistaken. In fact, conflicts are happening in more than many parts of the world, 476 million indigenous people spread out in 90 countries and territories, out of which 2/3 of them are in Asia. So we represent over 2,000 languages, distinct civilization, and many of the wars are happening in this part of the world. So for some of you tuning in from Manipur, know that we are not alone in our struggle. We are now living in a world at war. Currently, there are 21 known conflicts that we see in our newspapers, in our radios, in our TV. But imagine the 378 forgotten world's conflicts, many of which are in indigenous territories. What is happening in Manipur is a product of what is also happening globally, in which over 117 million displaced currently because of this crisis, as we have seen. What is very worrying, and also this is a big picture of Women's War Memorial, as many of us also mentioned, that sovereignty and violence have been intricately linked in history. Foucault defines sovereignty as a right to take life or let live, a power that is ultimately based on the right to kill. So really, like if you look at theories of what's happening in Manipur, you can see the juxtaposition of how the disposal and life and death of the inhabitants is that of, it is a monopoly of physical force, continues to rule over their lives, as we have seen in Manipur and northeast of India. Foucault had coined the word biopower, biopolitics. And when I was reading Foucault, I could really understand the Foucauldian techniques of what's happening in Manipur. Foucault highlights how human masses are eliminated in the name of protection and survival of a nation, a people, and a class. So what we are hearing today from what Tamu Pradip and Jarjum, Ani Jarjum, are actually, what has been happening across years, decades, also in other parts of the world. Now, let me center our thinking to our region. Let us understand what's happening in Manipur and in northeast of India. This is a region which is home to 45 million people, belonging to 272 ethnic indigenous groups. These regions, many of them were Asiatic modern nation states. And the process in which many of these regions merge with the Union of India continues to be in a state of contestation. So I always say India is a young nation, is still a nation in the making. And what we are seeing in Manipur and in northeast of India is a byproduct of that incomplete nation building. So BU's geostrategic area, we border 5 countries. We are just below China, where Jarjum is speaking from Arunachal Pradesh. Just last couple of weeks, China said Arunachal Pradesh is a part of China. Can you imagine? And so this is still a contested territory. We have contested territories in different parts of this region. The region marked in red is the region we're talking about. It's South Asia's longest running conflict. We have 72 armed groups operating here, over 300,000 troops. And we still have a martial law imposed here, a former British colonial law, clamped first in this part of our region since 1958 and continues till today. So many of us, including myself, grew up under this martial law. Now, the most beautiful parts of our world which are under conflict are this is Sikkim, some of you have visited. And then they're also heavily militarized. These are Indo-Bangladesh border area, which I have visited several times. And currently there are attempts being made to fence the Indo-Myanmar border. So these are very heavily militarized zone called Indo-Myanmar Friendship Road, but currently these roads are all closed at the moment because of the Manipur conflict. Just taking a moment to reflect, to meditate, how beautiful these regions are of the part of the world where currently the hills and the valley, buffer zones in between 2 different parts. And these are, which should never happen. Buffer zones should be between nations. But currently, Manipur is home to various communities. 13. It's a multi-ethnic, multi-religious, and a multicultural state. Weaving has been a part of many indigenous culture in this part of the world. We love bamboo shoot. This is a home to so many indigenous cuisine and food. Again, one of the most diverse parts of the world. This is Manipur. And even before India had its own constitution in 1950, Manipur had its own written constitution in 1947. So this is to say the rich, diverse history. And I'm a historian by training also. And the history of all of this is not in the textbooks of the world's largest democracy. And hence, even to understand what is happening in Manipur in the last 10 months, even New Delhi media, the national media, failed to understand what is happening in the region. As a result, so many issues of what is happening has not been really. Manipur has its own indigenous language and script. And so, again, very rich history, culture, tradition. Now, the reality is, even if you come with an Indian visa, you're not allowed to freely enter these areas. You need to apply for a permit called restricted area permit, or all of this, permits which are a part of former British colonial times. This area is also very geostrategic. China's One Belt, One Road initiative includes this part of the world. So can you imagine that, like, when everybody was focused on 2 ethnic struggles, the geopolitics of what's happening here is also to be noted. The region is also the gateway to what is known as Southeast Asia. In fact, for some of you who have traveled to Laos, Vietnam, Cambodia, Myanmar, we know how similar it is. In fact, I call northeast of India as the beginning of actually Southeast Asia. We are juxtaposed between South Asia and Southeast Asia, and in the middle of nowhere, because neither will South Asia understand us, neither will Southeast Asia understand us. So we are talking about this area called the northeast of India, which seems like to be suspended in time, space, and memory. Now, what is also happening is in the war in Myanmar, as many of us have spoken today, the largest internally, more than like millions have been displaced also in neighboring Myanmar. And the impact of what is happening in Myanmar has been also felt in Manipur and parts of northeast of India. one of the highest displacement in the Burma conflict has been in Sagaing region, which is just opposite Manipur and Mizoram and other parts. So many parts of the northeast of India have been impacted by this conflict. This is an image in which in the last 10 months, active violence, the ones which are marked in red, are where active violence have erupted. These are areas of intense fighting, areas of many deaths and disappearances, which has happened in the last 10 months in the state of Manipur, which both Ani Jarjum and Tamo Pradip had highlighted. Over 200 people. This is just the official estimates, but it will be, for us in our assessment, it will be triple times then the official data. We have been tracking the number of deaths, injuries, and disappearances since the violence erupted in the last 10 months, as well as in the last 20 to 30 years. And it became intensified with violence which are concentrated like a necklace around the valley area of Imphal Valley. So as a result, so many people have been displaced, as more than 70,000. Many of these displaced people are in Mizoram. Some of them are in Meghalaya. They're in Assam. They're in Nagaland. And many of them have also gone to Delhi for protection. So this is of the last 10 months of data that we have tracked down, in which huge internally displaced communities, which has been happening. As we mentioned, this should be change into the 10th month of conflict, almost a year of conflict, over 238 killed, over 6,300 injured. These are images, James, from the last 10 months. Last 10 months. These are all images from this part. Over 72,000 displaced and 32 reported missing. We have been trying to link with families of the disappeared of the last 10. These are only data of the last 10 months to a year. As we mentioned, because the history of 45 million people in this are not in the history, they are blanked out. So even when there was assessment by both scholarship and media in India, they couldn't understand what is happening, but just juxtaposed in a binary of a clash between two ethnic groups. And my presentation in the last, in the next 5 minutes will focus on why. Whether it's people from the Kuki community or from the Meitei community or from Arunachal or Tripura and Nagaland, when anyone comes from this part of the region to Delhi, we are given a term called Chinkies. That means people with small eyes and snub nose. We are also called chow mein, momos, and subjected to racial discrimination. This is a picture of a 19-year-old boy, Nido Tanya, who was killed in the streets of Delhi on a clear case of racial violence. And we were there. I was right there in Delhi when this protest erupted, and we tried to get an anti-discrimination policy plan. These are images from that time. We are Indians, not Chinky. So the reason of what is happening in this understanding the conflict there. This is not just happened in the last 10 months, but this is a conflict which has been there, as we mentioned, longest running conflict in Asia. We still have a martial law, as we mentioned, which gives Indian military the right to arrest, to detain, and to kill anyone on mere charge of suspicion, and no one can go to court. Many historic and archaeological sites in Manipur and India's northeast have been militarized, but in the past 10 years, there are demilitarization of Kangla, as you can see, the images of the Manipur king's coronation sites. They were demilitarized, but for a long time, they were military. 72 armed groups operate in Manipur, in India's northeast, still today. So, in as much as, and a lot of them, of the armed groups, hold sway politically, they hold sway on what should be happening in our region. So we are living in a society where the weaponization of our life, society, and polity is a reality. My research that I did in Jawaharlal Nehru showed 58 types of weapons from 13 countries flooding Manipur and northeast of India. More than 50,000 people have died in this region. 20,000 people in Manipur have been widowed. That's the reason why we established the Manipur Women Gun Survivors Network to help 20,000 women who have been registered. For 70 years, of violence in this part of our world and not a single solution in sight. I mapped out in my book, South Asia's Fractured Frontier, that the types of weapons which are flooding. So in as much as northeast of India is a biodiversity hotspots, and of course there are different people and different ethnicities, but when you fuse a region with guns and ammunition, then this loss of lives happen. And I've been mapping this for the last 20 years of our lives. What is also critical for our audience to know is that the narrative of small arms and insurgencies in northeast of India, and mind you, I wrote this in the year 2001, 2, and 3, that the narrative of conflict in this part of the world is not just of a conflict of ethnic violence or weaponization, it is also a narrative of small arms, narcotics, and insurgencies, as all weapons of all types are pumped into the region to fight South Asia's protracted little wars. This is what I wrote in my book, South Asia's Fractured Frontier. So it is also the political economy of conflict is also currently played out in Manipur and northeast of India, where the politics of guns and drugs, we have Manipur right now in the last 2 years in Burma. The number of poppy, the heroin, narcotic trade has doubled up in the last 2 years to 3 years of Burma conflict. Now, Manipur and northeast of India share over a 1,640 kilometer with Myanmar, which is known as the Golden Triangle, which produces 60% of the world's heroin. So the northeast of India, Manipur became a conduit. Now, while poppy and other synthetic drugs are produced in northeast of India, in Myanmar and Laos and other region, many of these drugs are pushed into Manipur and northeast of India. That's why you will see drug seizures in Manipur and Mizoram every single day. Because of the conflict in the last 10 months in Manipur, because Moria has been shut, majority of the now drug trafficking is happening through Mizoram. So this is what I call the transnational criminalization and narco-politics happening in the region as one of the critical factors, which has resulted in entrench what Damo Pradip calls like protracted, conflicts, which has been happening in this region. So as a result, many of our regions of the world, which are beautiful, have been militarized, weaponized, drug flooding that we have. Manipur has one of the highest cases of HIV/AIDS in the entire country. And I have lost family, I have lost classmates in drug overdose and others. So as a result, when the government of India tries to clamp down of it, our cinema halls, our schools have been occupied. Military operations are a reality for the last 3-4 decades happening in the region. And a lot of children, as Anya Jarjum has also mentioned, 500 child soldiers in our region. We only hear about Boko Haram abducting children in Nigeria and other parts. But in northeast of India, we have all had children now being recruited to fight in these violence. And girls picking up guns in many parts of our world. So how can we have a society to evolve? This is the crisis. These are many children who have been abducted by non-state armed groups in the region. We hear about the Rohingya crisis, but before the Rohingya crisis, northeast of India has one of the highest cases of internally displaced and has worsened since then. But yet, the news from this part of the world, because media is not allowed to enter, no proper research by scholars, whether in New Delhi or abroad. As a result, this region continues to be a dark spot. Population engineering happens continuously in this part of the region. We have a denial of our rights continuing. As a result, there's an attempt to change democracy, what I call population engineering. As a result, the sensitivity of many communities in Manipur has been the fact that indigenous people may become minority in their own land is one of the fear factors, which is out there in the consciousness, which needs addressing rather than this. So as I mentioned, more than 50,000 lives have been lost in this region. Manipur has one of the highest cases of extrajudicial executions. These are photographs of many of the people who have been lost, mass graves found in this region. These are families that we have worked closely with, whose families have also been killed in fake encounter killings there. Sexual violence has been a reality in this part of our world. And so the last point we'll share that this current conflict is seen as a law and order problem. Can you imagine? By the government of India. So as a result, there are 300,000 troops and a martial law. Foreign journalists, diplomats are not allowed. ICRC, for instance, is not allowed into Manipur. As a result, if there are landmine injuries, there are amputations, there's no proper, like in the way in which that can be happening. So there's a huge humanitarian crisis. Manipur has been northeast of India, and particularly Manipur has been in the throes of humanitarian crisis for the last 7 decades. So there are important issues that has to be tackled. And I remember Václav Havel, who wrote in his essay, The Power of the Powerless, that the current regime, the current situation is about mounting a total assault on humans. And we humans in Manipur and northeast of India we feel alone, we feel abandoned and isolated. So this is a current crisis. And I will end with a good note that, as Anya Jarjum has also mentioned, in spite of all the conflicts, we have more than 116-year-old extraordinary Indigenous women's movement. These are images from Women's War of 1904 and 1939, in which the women of Manipur fought against British colonial rules and was able to carve the nation, the history of the state, in which has shown the power of when Indigenous women come together across in ethnic groups. This for me is a pathway towards future in this. Manipur has a 500-year-old historic Ima markets run only by women. The New York Times covered this story. So again, this is a place where women can galvanize. And so how do we work across inter-ethnic communities? This is how the women in Manipur have been defending. And also, as we mentioned, women from different ethnic groups have also come up in the current crisis. How do we ensure that we all sit down together and talk? And what we would like to share is the next generation of people of the Manipur and Northeast. We've also launched the Northeast India Women Initiative. In fact, in the next 24 hours, we will be having our 5th Northeast India Women Peace Congregation in the next 24 hours, actually, because we realize that for conflict in this part of our world to stop, there are 17 peace talks and not a single woman in that. So we worked to build alliances across the northeast of India and to be able to ensure that women are a critical part of decision-making in this. We have launched groups to help women have been at the forefront, non-violent ways of ensuring peace and justice in this part of our world. So we have not only working on the policy level, but we try to put food on the table. These are images of women from inter-ethnic communities coming together. And we have been working through the crisis and also for the last decade and a half on what I called, if wars are engineered by those who have access to guns, drugs, and power, we can engineer peace. And it's in fact, the women of Manipur and Northeast India are the pathway. As we mentioned, Anya Jarjum is sitting right there here in this. We had women from all the ethnic groups in this extraordinary historic photo coming for the 2nd Northeast India Women Initiative for Peace in Assam. And we're hosting the 5th one in the next 24 hours. And I would like to end with a quote. So the recommendation or way forward, de-weaponize the region, arms must be laid down. The repeal of a former colonial act, which is the greatest flaw, must be done away with. We have to work to set up a Truth and Reconciliation Commission to investigate the violence and work towards peace and healing and reconciliation. We need to work to tackle the transnational organized crimes happening in the region, guns, drugs, and human trafficking in the border areas. We have to work to look at indigenous peace-building approaches. Northeast of India has really good, and we have to look at what are those. We have to include the history of this region in the syllabus of India in syllabus around the world, which looks at on India and South Asia and Asia in general. And most importantly, to work towards protecting women and people who are working to defend their rights and for Democrats who are at risk there, ensure Indigenous women are included in peace process and peace talks. I wrote in my book, Mekle, that the birth of insurgency is in wronged histories, wrong destiny. The birth of insurgency is in radical ideals, rushing blood and guns. The birth of insurgency is in damaging governmentality, dirty policies, and politics. The birth of insurgency is in witnessing innocent deaths, wrong arrests, and torture. The birth of insurgency is in hungry bodies, haunted futures. This is what I wrote more than a decade and a half ago. Until today, it continues. That the history and our present lives and history, are they related? And as history weaves and time weaves our history, and history weaves our present lives, we all get woven. And this is where we need to start. How do we ensure that we know our past to inform our present, that we can decide towards a future of peace, which is coexistence, which is ensuring that Manipur, which is a multi-ethnic, multi-religious, multicultural state, continues to strive and be that beacon of hope. As Ani said, if what is happening in Manipur, the whole northeast of India is watching. We should be able to bring back that peace that people in Manipur deserve for our peace and our justice and our security. Thank you. Yam nungai jere.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Bina, for that broad, sweeping overview. So I think we'd like to bring at least Pradip back into the discussion here as well. And then I guess Jarjum is listening on the road. I'm not sure if she has any connection, so we'll probably keep it to just the three of us for now. We have a very short time left, unfortunately, but I think one of the as somebody who is not a specialist of the region, but also is looking from the outside as an interested observer, I think this conversation has been very helpful in contextualizing particularly the May 3rd, 2023 violent incidents and the ongoing protracted violence that's happened since then that Pradip helped us, I think, to contextualize that as I think in an important way, because otherwise there's a danger here of thinking of this isolated violence as a kind of interethnic violence that's something limited to the groups of this region, when in fact, as I think all of your presentations have noted, there are exogenous or external factors here related to a longer term history on the one hand, also to a certain geographic setting that's related to access to land and other issues that have caused some of those tensions, but then also big issues related to the flow of drugs and guns into the region as well. So this presents a very complicated picture. The other part that I think really struck me was what I think I heard most of you saying in particular was that if the Indian government really wanted to resolve this situation or clamp down on the violent conflicts that have taken place, that there would be a possibility to do that. So obviously that invites the question of why hasn't that taken place? And I think one could speculate about particular possibilities there. For example, this kind of disarray, conflict, chaos, violence might also work well into the hands of certain political, or even, as Jarjum even insinuated, perhaps even corporate entities too. I hadn't thought about that side of it. I thought that was an interesting comment. But I would wonder if maybe you might just, until others in the audience might want to submit questions on the Q&A, my one takeaway kind of thought is just, I know there are elections coming up, but we also have Biren Singh, who is the chief minister of Manipur. And so what is the possible roles that might be played here from the outside to stem the violence here? Or the other question, which goes back to all of your comments just about the need for communication and dialogue and a kind of dispassioning of this moment now to head off that violence. how might that the kind of internal relations, particularly that we find between the Kikus and the Métis begin to cross that that boundary of being able to speak with each other rather than just fight each other. So maybe I'll just throw that out as kind of, it's a very broad, open question, I realize, but now that we've contextualized the problem, I think thinking forward as well and might also be one possible way to consider this issue. So I'll just open that up to any of you, either of you, for any thoughts, and then invite the audience to please use the Q&A box if you do have any questions. Okay, thanks.
Shall I take that question?
Yeah, please, Pradip.
Yeah, I was under the impression we were talking about the current crisis only. You know, after listening to Bina, there is a bigger conflict happening as well, and this is only part of that. And maybe it's not totally related to that, to the larger conflict. The larger conflict has to be understood in a different perspective. I would say that this is about so much of it is about there are the states which are already formed, and that had to come together to form India. And India, the first article says India, that is Bharat, will be a union of states. That the states are already there. And in this larger context, even India had that insecurity in the beginning, that you were left with 560 princely states to unite. And many of them didn't want to join India. And some of them were reluctant, Kashmir to Junagadh to Travancore, to so many, if you see the first article, it spells out that federalism. India will be a union of states. And then the second article is that India is still an incomplete story, that you can still bring in more territory. And this is how Sikkim was brought in 1975 using Article 2. And the Article 3, Fali Nariman says, he's recently expired and he's a jurist, very famous jurist. He's written a number of books. And in one of them, he was talking about federalism, how India is supposed to be a federal state, but then again, that insecurity in the beginning made it introduce features in the constitution which are against federalism. Article 3, for instance, says that any of the princely states, any of the states can be abolished, been torn into 2 or 3 states, even the names can be changed and that kind of thing. And this was supposed to be a warning to the princely states. And if you don't behave, we can even change your name. We can just erase you from the map. That kind of warning. And he was actually suggesting that this article should go, that or else shelve it. You're never to be used again, because this is not federalism. But that's another thing. The other thing that I want to say about the larger conflict is that there were also many non-state people. And the excluded area that the British talked about. You had people. You have a state, it's easy to negotiate with the state. And there were some states, because that there's a centralized bureaucracy, you know who to talk to and you know how to come to an agreement. But in a non-state space, you go to a village, you have an agreement, next village won't agree. So it's a chaos, the non-state thing. So what happened was the Northeast, as James Scott has written in his book, The Art of Not Being Governed, Anarchic History of Upland Southeast Asia. And I think that applies to the Northeast as well, that you have so many people who are non-state, and then suddenly you come to the state consciousness. And when you come to that state consciousness, you're already in another state, and you want to carve your own space within the state or an independent state. And that's basically where the problem with insurgency, much of the problem, I wouldn't say everything. I can't just say this is the final explanation, but this is one of the biggest causes, I would say, is that you become state aware, and you want your own state, and then you find that you're already in another state. That's one of the big problems in this. And the other thing is, since the larger canvas, we're talking about the larger canvas as well. The other thing is geopolitics. We've seen the drawing of the McMahon line, how that was a part of the great game, that that Britain and Russia and Britain was always afraid that Russia would come into Tibet. And they were trying to prevent that. And the McMahon line became necessary, because when the Manchu dynasty fell in the early 20th century, before that they were actually, as any that was the last kick, as Ellis Salam says, last kick of that empire, that they had to do something to prove that they still exist. And they had a forward policy in which they came to Tibet, and they were probing into Sikkim and Bhutan and Nepal. And Nepal, the British were not so worried because they had a robust army. And Sikkim was already a protected state, so China wouldn't be able to do anything. But they were literally worried about Bhutan. So the British had to send a team to Bhutan. And in 1910, they had to modify an agreement which was there in 1865 and bring Bhutan's foreign policy into Indian hand. That was a British India. That kind of thing was happening. So there was a geopolitics happening there. And now what's happening is in Myanmar, again, the same thing is happening. In Myanmar, China needs Myanmar. There's no doubt about it, because they don't have any route to the Indian Ocean. And the Indian Ocean is important for China because they have resource centers out in Africa and the Arabian Peninsula. They have to reach those places. Otherwise, if since they don't have a land route, they would have to go by the Malacca Strait, which is a roundabout kind of a route, and that is not totally within their control. It's in the sphere of control of the Americans, so they are not very secure of using only or depending only on the Malacca Strait. So they want a highway passage through Myanmar. So they would invest anything. They would befriend, whether it's military or civilian government, whoever is in power, they will try to befriend the government. And since China is there, China's rival will also be interested. This is what a former diplomat, Indian diplomat, M.K. Bhadrakumar has written, that if China is interested in the place, why wouldn't China's adversaries, including the US, be not interested in Myanmar? So that kind of thing is happening. He's saying that it's already happening. US through proxies, China directly. That kind of thing is already happening there, and that is having some kind of repercussion in the Northeast as well. And now it's Manipur, since the conflict is there. So he's saying that there's a geopolitical angle as well in the Meitei-Kuki conflict, and which is why it is becoming much more complex. And in recent times, if you notice, the Indian government also has decided to cancel the free movement regime, as they call it, where communities on both sides can move 15 kilometers of within each other's country. And there, I think there's a particular time period without any visa, and I think you can just move. That has been ended. And then the other thing was that they also made the decision to fence the border. And before this, there was another move by which the government said, in any kind of infrastructural development along the border, there will be no forest environment clearance necessary, which meant that anywhere in entire Nagaland, because these are small states, Nagaland or Manipur or Mizoram, you can just have any project without even the clearance of the forest department. That kind of thing. And this M.K. Bhadrakumar, and later on another Sanjay Pulpika, he's the director of another think tank, important think tank in India. He has written another article in the Hindu where he was talking about this, that these are actually a response. In Myanmar, Chinese influence is growing, and India is always uneasy because they are also, in that adversarial position between India and China. So when China gets too close to the border, India is always also uneasy. So these moves are because of that. So what I'm basically saying is that the conflict that we are witnessing now in Manipur, Meiteis and Kuki, we can see it at that level itself, and it has to be solved at that level as well. But there is also a larger picture, and so we have to bring in that as well, which is what these people are actually suggesting, that you have to be also negotiating it at that level. And I think this is important because some things that you think is just in the local context may not actually work in the larger context. The geopolitics has a different kind of a logic happening, and there's a different kind of a dynamic that's happening. So many have talked about the Ukraine war, why Ukraine is allowed to do anything. It's a free country. Why is Russia not doing it? And Russia has those compulsions. There are people explaining why this would not have happened, because there are the logics of geopolitics work differently. the local politics, local idea of justice. So that kind of thing, the Monroe Doctrine, all that. John Mearsheimer, I keep listening to him, and he was giving these things, these kind of arguments, and I think that applies here as well. That and in my initial presentation, I was talking about the local thing only, and I do believe that this is very important because the local problem is also threatening for the local population, so they have to solve the problem. But the larger picture also have to be addressed, and somehow, if that is addressed, maybe the influences of this thing, and as I said earlier, geopolitics can have grave consequences. The McMahon line, the contest between China and India now over McMahon line is also because of that. As I was saying, the probe into Nepal, Bhutan thing has to be changed. And fortunately for British India at the time, the Manchu dynasty collapsed because of the Republican Revolution. We saw that in the movie, The Last Emperor. Was that the Last Emperor? Mm-hmm. What was that movie? I forget that movie about that little Last Emperor. Yeah. So when the Manchu dynasty fell, British immediately called the Simla Conference, 1913-14, to draw this McMahon line. And the McMahon line, the boundary. It was not called McMahon line at the time because it was still not drawn. And they had to invite China because I've studied a bit of this. So and they had to invite China because it's a boundary between Tibet and India. And why were they inviting China? And this was because of the St. Petersburg Convention in 1907. Alistair Lamb has done a book on this, and he was actually saying that the British were so uneasy about Russia coming into Tibet, so they had to say that, okay, if you have to deal with Tibet, sometimes you have to you have a locust problem, which they don't know the boundaries, so you have to cooperate with Tibet and do that. But even if you have to do that, you have to involve China. You have to do it through China. And China was a weak country at the time, so they were not afraid. British were not afraid. But Alistair Lamb was actually saying this was like, as in judo, you have the lighter person can throw the heavier person using the weight of the heavier person. And that actually happened in the St. Petersburg Convention because Russia was on the back foot at the time. They had just been defeated by Japan in the naval war. So they were on the back foot. And still, the British forced this St. Petersburg Treaty in 1907. And that because of that, British had to invite China in that Shimla conference, where ultimately China walked out. So it was signed between Tibet and India, and the British couldn't even publicize it because Russia would protest. So they didn't publish that thing in this Atchins Treaty for a long time. Then what happened was in 1919, the communist revolution in Russia happened, and the Tsarist regime collapsed. And in 1921, Lenin actually abrogated many of the treaties that the Tsar signed, including the St. Petersburg thing. So, which is why the British were free to publish this treaty, the McMahon, that Simla Conference Treaty, only in 1938. They didn't have to hurry, but they were free to do it. So in 1938, it was published. So that kind of geopolitics has a grave implication even in local politics. This is basically what I'm saying. And what we are witnessing in Manipur today and the Northeast today may be also an outcome, partly an outcome of geopolitics.
Okay, great. Thank you, Pradip. I think the this issue of the image that Bina raised earlier about a kind of woven fabric that we see uniting people has also been fraying, but we also can see this metaphor. If you pull on one of these threads, it links up to these much larger issues. I think that's very clear. We're actually a bit over time here, but I want to give Bina the last word and maybe weave in. We did have one, and perhaps it's something also on your mind, Bina, which is one of the audience members asked if whether bringing in international intervention in this conflict is crucial, or should the solution be national or community driven? So I'll throw that out as as a kind of final question. Let you have a few words, but we're going to have to wrap up here very quickly because I also have to run off to teach.
So 1 minute, I think we should. So thank you so much. I think it's a brilliant question. First of all, I think to realize that the Manipur conflict that we see is just not of the Manipur conflict, but 45 million people living in northeast of India. We have to put our heads and our minds to really think the geostrategic location which we are there, and then to be able to talk to nations and across the region to be able to find that peace. I have also traveled across to many parts of Burma. So there's 60 million in Burma, 40 million in northeast of India, talking about 100 million people whose lives are tossed in the air. So I think, James, it's really important that people who are looking into this issue as scholars, as policymakers, we need to think into what is happening there and to be able to provide solutions. To involve Indigenous women who are living across the region is absolute must. It is an absolute must to ensure that women are in all these peace talks and negotiation. For me, what is happening in our region, we should be able, that's why I looked at Indigenous methods of peace building. We have the tools that is needed. So many leaders, so many communities. Nikito Iralu, Ani Jarjum is listening to us. There's extraordinary people in the region who can start negotiating for peace. It has to start from our own homes by understanding one another. I say nation building or regional building. It has to be done with a lot of love and care, of respect for one another, and not by killing one another, but with a lot of this conscious decision has to be taken. I would say this, James. Thank you.
Great. And I think the fundamental basis underlying a lot of this is simply education and knowledge and being able to understand these. One has a hard time in the face of the emotions of war and battle and conflict to be able to deal with such a fundamental thing. But in terms of the long-term efforts to build peace and understanding, I think that education is the core of that. So I hope we can play some role in that of keeping this clearly. I think what we've seen today is that keeping an eye on this issue, what's taking place in Manipur and the region at this time is part of a much larger context, and that this is a far more complicated than what we can deal with in a short time. And particularly with the elections coming up, I think we should revisit this issue after that as well, and keep the attention on what's happening and see how it evolves. But for now, I just really appreciate all of you coming and sharing your knowledge from on the ground in the region, but also from outside and larger efforts that are taking place. And really appreciate the time that Pradip and Jarjum have dedicated to spending time this morning with us. And as always, Bina, for keeping this issue at the forefront of attention. And we'll try to do our best to keep that up and as regularly as we can. So thank you again. And thank you to everybody who signed on. And a final big thank you to Tenzin Nodip, who was essential helping to bring all of this together. And let's do hope that the future will see cooler heads prevail, bring down the temperature of this conflict, and also that peace will return to such a beautiful place and wonderful people that live there. So with that, we'll hopefully end on a positive, optimistic note, which isn't always easy, but I think an important thing to do. So thank you again for everybody for joining us, and we'll bring it to a close here. Thanks again.